Okay, welcome everybody. Today I want to talk about Winget and Chocolatey, comparing both of those tools. And like a real world look at package management tools on Windows. But before we do that, you've been to any talks today, you'll have seen this, but we can never thank the sponsors too much, because without sponsors, there would be no event. So please go and see all the sponsors, go and grab some t-shirts from our booth in particular, mainly because I don't want to take any home. But grab some stickers as well, and just go and see all the sponsors and thank them for sponsoring today so that they come back next year and this continues to happen. So who am I, first of all? Why am I here? Why am I talking to you? My name is Paul Broadwith. I'm a technical engineering manager at Chocolatey Software. So me and my team are responsible for the Chocolatey products that some of you may be using. I'm based in Glasgow in Scotland, and I've got over 30 years experience now in IT. My original role before becoming a technical engineering manager, I was involved in the operations and infrastructure side in my career, and I've also been involved in development as well. I'm also a Microsoft MVP for cloud and data center, particularly for my work in PowerShell, and I'm a Microsoft certified trainer as well. So this slide is here for two reasons. First of all, it annoys Rob Sewell, so that's always a good reason to put a slide on anything. Secondly, it's to remind me to tell you guys that to echo basically what Rob said this morning, not everybody's first language is English. In Scotland, we speak particularly fast. I haven't done a talk in a year, so I'm a little bit nervous, so I'll be possibly speaking too fast. So just kind of put your hand up, give me the Team America secret signal, whatever you need to do to encourage me to slow down a little bit if I need to. And this is another little bit of admin to get out of the way. This talk is my personal opinion. Okay, this is not a Chocolatey sponsored talk. We do have sponsored talks. There's one tomorrow. Won't go into that here, but this is not a sponsored talk. Nobody at Chocolatey has asked me to say anything. Nobody at Chocolatey has asked me to remove anything from these slides. The Chocolatey team did see this talk. They've seen it about 2 weeks ago, I think it was. And I got some feedback from that. But beyond that, Chocolatey's had no input into this talk. It's research and findings based in the sense that I've been using Winget now for a couple of months. Obviously working for Chocolatey, that's my bread and butter. But I've been using Chocolatey now for a couple of months to get an idea of, the tool itself, how it works and how it kind of compares to what Chocolatey does. And it's also, as I said, based on some research that I've been doing for various different things, all to do with this talks. So just to be very clear, I am not an expert on Winget, and I don't pretend to be. So some of the things I may say in this talk, if you're using Winget, you might find are incorrect, or maybe I've put a slightly different slant on it. Please correct me. I'm very, very happy to try and make this talk as unbiased as possible. And that's why I've got a question mark at the end of unbiased, because you can be the judge of that. And there are no scores on this. We're not totting up a score at the end and going, hey, this one got 20 points and that one got 10 points, it's the winner. That's not how we're doing that. This is a kind of high-level overview of both products to give you an idea of what you possibly use either at home, or your organization, your business, etc. Okay, it's only a 30-minute talk. We'll probably run over a little bit. In my practice, we'll be over a little bit. But we've not got enough time to deep dive into any particular area. I would really like to potentially in future talks, but not for this one. So this talk, as I said, is hopefully only going to be 30 minutes long, but it might be a little bit longer, but we have 15 minutes left for Q&A at the end. So if you could keep your questions to then, that would be appreciated. So just to kind of look at what this talk is and what it isn't, probably better start with what it isn't, first of all. The commands you see on the screen there basically find Adobe Reader in the community repositories for both Winget and Chocolatey. It'll then install Adobe Reader, it'll list Adobe Reader, and it'll uninstall Adobe Reader. There's no point us having demos of these kind of things because both tools do this. So we're not kind of looking at individual commands. I'm not going to do any demos in this talk. This is all going to be slides and me talking. Okay, if you want to compare the kind of commands for both tools, then that's something you could dive into and have a look, but that's not what we're going to do here today. But what this talk is we're going to look at supporting unsupported platforms, probably particular interest to people that are supporting many different types of operating systems, so maybe organizational use case rather than a kind of home user that tends to have one operating system that they're using. We'll look at the installation options as well for both tools and how easy and difficult it is to get that onto your machines. We're looking at third-party support as well, integrations, configuration managers. We're going to look at repository managers as well. We're going to also look at packages, manifests, submissions, community. How are you going to get packages into those community repositories, create packages, and how it kind of works under the surface. Organizational options, Big use case differentiator between like home user or small business, larger organizations have different needs. So we're going to look at some of that as well. We're also going to dive into privacy and just have a summary at the end as well. So the first thing, supported and unsupported platforms and kind of what it runs on as well. So these are all supported operating systems at the moment that Microsoft currently support. And Chocolatey supports Chocolatey on these operating systems as well. That's what we kind of use for our kind of support lifecycle as well. So the two at the top there are Windows clients, Windows 10 22H1 and Windows 11 22H1 being the kind of minimum versions there. And as you'd probably expect, Winget supports them. If anybody's used Winget, you'll know it doesn't run on, or it's not supported to run on a server operating system. So this is probably no surprise to you. We'll touch on that in a little second, particularly to do with Server 2022, but Chocolatey actually is supported in all these operating systems, all the way back to 2008 in R2 in Azure. And something I heard earlier on today actually runs on Windows 2000 Advanced, which I had no idea about. So that if you've got any of those boxes sitting about, you can run Chocolatey on that. I'd probably encourage you to swap them out for something more modern, but if you want to use Chocolatey on that, you can. Windows Server 2008 R2 in Azure does it support in January next year, so that will fall off of that list. But currently we support that. And out of the box, 2008 R2 comes with PowerShell 2. So Chocolatey continues to support PowerShell 2 all the way back to that. And this is just a quick note that I mentioned about server operating systems. Again, trying to be balanced. While Windows Server operating systems are not supported for Winget, because for Windows Server 2019's case, the Microsoft Store is not available, but you can run it on Windows Server 2022. It does say that it may be possible. According to my research, it is possible. You can get it to run in Server 2022, but it's not supported by Microsoft, at least at the moment anyway. And that support apparently should be considered experimental. But as I said, there's lots of YouTube videos out there, lots of blog posts and articles. People have actually done it. So your mileage may vary with that a little bit. So we looked at supported operating systems. We're now looking at what does it actually work on. So it might not be supported on these operating systems, but will it run on there? So between 1809, Windows 10 1809 and 22H1, we looked at earlier on that Winget would run on 1809 or later. So as you'd probably expect, it will run on that. But it doesn't run on any of the other operating systems that are listed there. Whereas Chocolatey will run on all of these operating systems. We do know that it still runs on 2003 and 2003 R2 and Windows 7 internally. So if you've got your own internal repository, it'll work just fine. The reason I say internal is because the Chocolatey Community repository requires TLS 1.2, which is not available on those operating systems. So you'll have a bit of difficulty getting packages from the community repository. Otherwise, you can run that internally. So installation, I'm just going to grab a drink before we jump onto that. So supported Winget installs for Windows 10. We've got the Microsoft Store there, and it's the app installer app that you can install, and you get Winget from that. You can also install the MSIX bundle from GitHub, and you can use the Apex commandlets for that, and it will install on there. There's also a Windows patch. Put that in italics, put a question mark at the end, because I can't find any consistent behavior. Looking at Microsoft documentation, it talks about later versions of Windows 10, how Winget installed. I've spoke to people who confirm that's the case. I've spoke to people who confirm it's not the case. And in my testing, I couldn't find anything consistent. I had 3 virtual machines for part of my testing. Windows 10 Pro, Enterprise and Education. And they were all patched to the same level. And the only one that actually had Winget installed at the end of that was the Enterprise version. So again, your mileage may vary there. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. Maybe the other people are as well. But apparently it should be there. So you might be able to get it on there with the Windows patch as well. For Windows 11, it's very much the same from GitHub or the Microsoft Store again. And I've put out of the box there, sort of. The reason I put sort of there is that Winget will be installed on Windows 11 once the first user logs in. It then takes about 15 minutes. Again, this is just part of my testing. It takes about 15 minutes, and then Winget's installed on there. That's great. If you're using something like Packer, where nobody actually logs in, you possibly want to use one of the other methods. I don't know if Microsoft's going to fix that or that's the way it is, but that's again just my experience over a little bit. And there's also a Chocolatey package. I created a Chocolatey package just as part of this talk. Thought let's get parity across it all, and we'll see there's a Chocolatey package on Winget as well for Chocolatey CLI, so you can install it with that as you know. And so, yeah, supported Chocolatey CLI install. We've got the install script. If you've ever installed Chocolatey, you'll know you run that command from chocolatey.org/install. It's that one-line command. You run it, it downloads that install script, runs it, etc. If you've used it, you'll know all about that. So that install script is from there. You can internalize that as well and use that in your organization, save you connecting out to chocolatey.org every time. There's also an MSI as of version 2 of Chocolatey CLI that you released at the end of May. I was trying to work out what month we're in. At the end of May there. So there's now an MSI for that. That will get Chocolatey installed and it will allow you to upgrade as well. But what we're looking for is you to get that onto the box and then use Chocolatey to manage Chocolatey itself. That makes sense. And I've put in brackets there again, Winget. A bit like the Chocolatey package for the supported Wingets installed. These are not supported in that sense, but I put them in there just to let you know that they are available. So there's that Winget package as well. Windows 11, it's exactly the same. So I'm not going to jump through that. But what I was trying to show there with the two operating systems is that there's one consistent way of installing across the board. Very similar to Winget, but with a little bit of difference. Again, we've got that there as well. So integrations and support. What does it work with? What works with it? All of that kind of stuff. And I'm really looking at native integrations more than anything else. So we're here at PowerShell Conference EU, so it's all about PowerShells. There's a PowerShell gallery module. Unfortunately, I didn't get to Demetrius's talk earlier on. I believe that's what you were kind of looking at, Demetrius, was the PowerShell module, or that was part of it. So there it is there. You can use that with that PowerShell module with Winget as well. And it's down at the moment as 0.2.1, so a pre-kind of 1 version. There's also a Chocolatey CLI package for that as well. It installs the same module. There's package management in the any package provider. If any of you are old enough to remember Winget, we then had package management after that, and now we've got any package after that again. They're effectively kind of a high level doing the same sort of thing. There are package managers, kind of package manager there a little bit for PowerShell. So the any package provider is not a fork of package management. It's kind of rewrite a little bit. But you can use that in PowerShell as well. And I've put at the very bottom there in italics, Cobalt. I only found out about this on Saturday. That's why it's in italics, because I haven't used it and I don't know much more about it than this, but I thought it was worthwhile pointing out. So there's a crescendo wrapper for Winget, as I said, called Cobalt. And Ethan Bergstrom has created that. I think he did some stuff around PowerShell DSC as well for Chocolatey. So he's well into his package manager with PowerShell type work. So that might be something that you could use as well. Very similar for Chocolatey. Machine readable output, we have use the -R or the --limit -output option on the command line, and it'll give you machine passable output, so you can pass that with anything. We're talking about PowerShell here in particular, but you can pass that with PowerShell. There's official community PowerShell modules as well. Called Chocolatey, surprisingly enough. There's also a Chocolatey PowerShell DSC resource, which is maintained by Gail Colas that's running the event today, and that's part of the Chocolatey community. There's also CChoco, which is a PowerShell DSC resource that Chocolatey themselves maintain. Put my hand up, not particularly well, if we're honest, but we'll be doing some work on that soon. But that's still an option for you if you want to use that. Again, very similar to Winget, that package management in any package provider. We'll go over that again. But Chocolatey is built on PowerShell. If you've seen any Chocolatey talks, if you've ever used Chocolatey, you'll know that the Chocolatey package itself contains those PowerShell scripts. And if PowerShell didn't exist, I'm not entirely sure if PowerShell would. If PowerShell didn't exist, I'm not entirely sure Chocolatey would either. Maybe there'd be something else in there, but Chocolatey loves PowerShell, and that's part of the whole ecosystem and makeup of a Chocolatey package. And again, very similar to the Winget crescendo wrapper called Cobalt. There's one called Foil as well, again by Ethan Bergstrom. Again in italics, because I haven't used it. I found out about that on Saturday as well, so I haven't put any time into actually using that as yet. But that's another option that you could perhaps consider for PowerShell. Supported sources. So what a source is where you basically get packages from, where you can install packages from, you can upgrade packages from, and you can search. Those supported sources for Winget are the Microsoft Store. So it comes with 2 out of the box, which is the Winget source and the Microsoft Store source. We've also got an Azure REST source, which is like your kind of package manager repository that you can set up. But it's very much tied to Azure. You can run it locally but it still needs a lot of Azure bits attached to it. So you can run it through Visual Studio itself. But if you're going to run it production, it really needs Azure there because it's got all of that Azure stuff there. These are Cosmos database, for example, and various other bits and pieces. There have been some, reading some blog posts and reading some kind of forum comments about people saying that they're trying to de-Azurify it, if you want to call it that, move it to maybe another cloud or trying to run it locally. These threads always seem to end with nothing. It seems to be people are trying and they're not getting anywhere. So again, mileage may vary with that. Probably use that a lot in this talk as to how you can take that out of Azure and use it elsewhere. But if you're in Azure, that's an ideal place for you to use that from. There's also a static web source, which I found really interesting. I found a GitHub repository that if you're using Winget, you might be thinking, well, there's loads out there, but I found a GitHub repository that you could actually add as a source into Winget. And that particular repository, I think it had only a couple of packages on it that somebody was maintaining, but I thought it was really interesting. You can add that as a source. Perhaps it could be extended out to maybe vendors are going to offer their packages in their own GitHub repository or their own source that would be external. You would just simply add that as a source and be able to consume the packages from that. So that was interesting. I'd like to dig into that a little bit more. And it's very similar to the static NuGet v3 source that Chocolatey uses on the other side there. So those are kind of quite similar. I've genuinely found that quite interesting about the opportunities and the options you could get from that. I've put file sharing local folder there when we're looking at Winget because it's different in the kind of Chocolatey sense, which we'll come to in a second. When I'm looking at a local folder, I'm looking at a local folder of packages. And I'm going to point Winget at it and say, go and install a package from that folder. And that's not what it does. You can point at a manifest, an individual manifest, and say, install that. But you can't have a folder of manifests and just give it the folder and, select from that. So it was a little bit disappointing from that. Jumping over to the Chocolatey side, I've got a local folder on my machine here that I use for demos. Whole load of Chocolatey packages on there. I just add that as a source and install from there. That's far more convenient, I found. So maybe that will be added in the future. It seems like it would be a good option to add. But jumping fully over to the Chocolatey side, we've got the top two sources there, NuGet version 2 and version 3. They've been about for some time now, particularly V2. I couldn't give you a date on it, but I know V3 has been about for a few years now. And Chocolatey supports both of them now. As of version 2, we added NuGet version 3 support. And that's a JSON endpoint as opposed to the OData from version 2. But as we'll come and see in a little second, this is why so many repository managers support can be used for Chocolatey packages, because Chocolatey supports both of those types of sources. There's a static NuGet v3 source as well. As I said, you could stand that up, very similar to what we talked about Winget. There are actual static NuGet version 3 repositories, and you can stand that. I think it's a bit like you've ever heard of static and Hugo, those static site generators. It's the same sort of idea, where you just have the website being served. It's in a particular format, and it can be picked up from there. So I'd like to dig into both of those a little bit more at some point in a future talk. There's already alternative sources in Chocolatey as well. So we kind of allow other package managers, packages to kind of flow up into that single pane of glass that you get with Chocolatey. So you get your Chocolatey packages, and you get your programs and features, and you get these other sources. And the sources we currently support is Windows features. We've got Python, Cygwin, and Ruby as well. We also had Webpack. It's quite old and isn't used very much, to be fair. But Microsoft switched that off at the tail end of last year, so we removed that. But there is Winget support coming for that soon, so Winget will be an alternative source in Chocolatey as well. So you'll get those packages coming up into that single pane of glass. The file sharing local folder part I've already kind of been over. As I said, you can have that on your machine and you can install packages from there. So creating this list here, so we've got on the left configuration managers. You've probably heard of a lot of these. On the right, we've got repository managers. Again, you've probably heard of a lot of those. But what I tried to do was try to get a top 10 of what the internet recommends for these configuration managers and repository managers. I don't know if any of you have ever went in to look at top 10 of something for IT, but it's worse than the fake news in politics. It's ridiculous. A lot of marketing fluff, a lot of very obviously paid for articles and blog posts, but I managed to get some sort of curated list out of it. The one that's missing from here is SCCM. That wasn't in the list, so it's not something I've deliberately missed out. It's just wasn't in any of the lists, which was surprising to me. But looking at what support they have for Winget, that's what I was trying to get out there. We're looking at any package which we talked about in a few slides ago, and also Intune itself. None of the other configuration managers have native support for Winget. So I'm not talking about things like you can run commands in a lot of these configuration managers, okay, and you'll be able to then run the Winget commands from that. I'm talking about native support for modules or playbooks, recipes, whatever they call all of their stuff. So that's as far as supported for Winget. On the right-hand side, none of the repository managers actually support a Winget repository type. I did dig into all of them, and I couldn't find any support. A couple of issues in some of them suggesting to add it, but none of them have actually added it as of yet. But if we look at Chocolatey, all of them are supported. We have native integration for all of the ones on the left for the configuration managers. And the reason we have so much integration on the right-hand side is because Chocolatey supports NuGet version 2 and version 3 feeds. And because they are used so widely, because they're kind of old, because they're mature, they've been about a long time, all of these repository managers actually support them. The one that wasn't there until this morning was GitLab Package Registry, which we didn't actually officially support. But we actually do. We just thought it didn't work, but it does for unauthenticated feeds. So if you're having a kind of public GitLab Package Registry, you can use Chocolatey for that. If you're using an authenticated one, it doesn't work. And I think it's something to do with the GitLab authentication rather than Chocolatey itself. There's a GitHub issue about it, and there's some back and forwards. So packages and manifests, and really we're looking here at the community. We're looking at how you create packages and the kind of differences between the two. I'm going to grab another drink. So Winget uses manifests and the YAML format manifests. And it uses a separate Winget create tool. You could probably handcraft them. It's just a text file in the YAML. But it would make sense to use an actual tool to do it. So there's a separate Winget create tool that you can get, and it'll create that package for it. You point it to the binary. Let's say that it was an MSI in this case. So this came from when I was creating the Chocolatey package for Winget. And I used the Winget create tool. I pointed it to the MSI, and it grabbed a lot of defaults from the MSI, asked me some simple questions, and bang, the package was done. It was really, really straightforward, really simple, and I really, really liked the way it was done. And I think it's something that Chocolatey could learn a lot from, doing it in that way. But it creates multiple YAML files, as I've put there. So if you've got different locales, it'll create one for each locale. It creates the installer one. So I think for the Chocolatey one, it created 3 YAML files. But there's no flexibility in that manifest format, because all it will do is it allows you to run the installer and use arguments for that installer. So the installer itself just runs those arguments, and that's it. The package is installed or uninstalled or upgraded, whatever it is you're doing with that there. So there's no real flexibility to do anything after that, at the moment anyway. It only runs installers as well, or supported formats. So it does support zip packages. Installers in zip format. But it has to be an installer inside that as well. I thought it would be just normal files. You can dump them onto the file system, but it needs to have a kind of supported installer format in there as well. But one of the nice things as well was you could submit from the tool. So once you've created the package, you can actually run the command and it'll submit it as a GitHub pull request. And off it goes and does some automation and some other stuff, which we'll come to in just a second. So from a Chocolatey point of view, creating a package, you've got the ChocoNew command there, and that will find defaults for most installers. There's 22 supported installers for that. It's an XML format as opposed to YAML. So again, whichever camp you're in, one will be better than the other, but they're very much of a muchness. They're a text file in a particular format. You use the push command again to submit. You submit to Chocolatey Community repository or push the package to your internal repository. Same sort of thing, except as I said, Winget will submit its pull request to the community repository. It uses PowerShell to give that flexibility, so package parameters. And the often example I give for that is that a lot of people don't like desktop icons. I don't really know why, but it seems to be quite a big thing about not having desktop icons. So for example, if your installer puts that on there, you've not really got much control over that. But as part of a Chocolatey package, you can have a PowerShell script that runs, Chocolatey install script that will actually interpret those package parameters, say that you've added desktop icon, let's say. and it can then go and find the icon and do this. So there's things you can do post-install and pre-install, and if you've used the Chocolatey package, you'll know the kind of flexibility of how you can do that. And your imagination is pretty much whatever PowerShell can do, you can do in that package itself. There's also a package builder UI with the big business edition. So Choco New command I should have actually pointed out. It would Choco New, and there's lots of options you can add, and it'll be like author and copyright and all these different things, and I'll put that all into the metadata file for you. The package builder UI gives you that nice UI to actually look at. So the Winget Community repository, I was a little disappointed when I submitted the package, the Chocolatey package, because the steps were a little bit unclear. They were there, it was validation, installation, and scanning it went through. And I really liked the way it went. It kind of worked through GitHub. So if you've used like GitHub Actions, it was the same sort of, you get that information back about what's going. So that was really good, the steps it's going through. But it was a bit unclear about installation. The installation said it installed on all environments, but didn't actually tell you what those environments were. And the scanning as well, it said that it used Microsoft Defender and other scanners in quotes, but it didn't list what those other scanners were, unless I missed it, but I couldn't see that. So I think there should be more about that. We'll kind of talk about that a little bit later on. Installers that are not silent cannot be added. I think that's because it's a very much fixed format, that YAML format. It runs an installer with switches and there's nothing much you can do beyond that. So if it's not silent, it can't be added. There are, believe it or not, a lot of installers out there that just are still not silent for reasons I have no idea. But Chocolatey gets around it. We'll talk about that in a second, but Chocolatey get around that. But if they're not silent, they can't be added to Winget. The false positive AV scans as well are not accepted. You might think that's a great thing, but if you don't know what other virus scanners are there, it didn't really help when I was kind of reading those two together. Where do I submit my other reports to? Perhaps if there was a false positive, that information is given to you. You can do that, but you're encouraged to submit those false positive AV scans, get them put into the antivirus scanner, and then when it passes, it'll be accepted. The interaction is via pull request comments, as I said. So if you're using GitHub, you'll know all about that. It's actually pretty good, especially, as I said, if you're using GitHub, you'll know all about how that works. There's 19 Winget team and community moderators, or there was when the last time I looked. So they got that through. I was talking yesterday about when I submitted the Chocolatey package. From the time I submitted it to the time it was actually approved was 5 hours. That was really, really impressive to get that through there. So that was really good to go through all of that. There is 4,200 packages and 28,000 versions of those packages as well. So for a tool that's only 3 years old, it's doing pretty well. The Chocolatey Community repository is kind of less in there because a lot of it's covered with the Winget stuff, but the not silent installers can be scripted and are accepted. Because you've got the Chocolatey package formats using the PowerShell script, you can do a lot more. You've got a lot more flexibility that you can actually script those not silent installers. We work with maintainers as well on antivirus false positives to try and get them sorted out, and package issues as well. I didn't have any experience with that in Winget when I submitted. Perhaps that happens as well. So I'm not saying that's not happening, but we tend to work with the maintainers on that. Interactions via moderation comments in the package page. Again, it's pretty much like your GitHub pull request comments. And there's 12 Chocolatey team community moderators. There's 10,005 unique packages and 190,000 total packages in the community repository. And there's almost 2.4 billion downloads of all those packages. There is none of, I haven't missed those stats out for one yet. I couldn't find any. Maybe they don't publish it. Maybe it's not available. I don't know, but that's, I could only add the Chocolatey one there. So organizational options, I'm running a little bit behind. So it's different needs for different use cases. Effectively, an organization has completely different needs from a normal home user. So deployment may be easy for Winget. I've put may there because we talked about there was a Windows patch. Maybe it worked, maybe it didn't, and you got that out of the box support on Windows 11 as well. If you don't have any issues with that, then the deployment will be easy, but I've put may there because your mileage may vary. Winget's MIT license, which is really important for some organizations. Some organizations can't accept it as well. I was actually reading more about this yesterday to do with, I'm not a lawyer, but to do with patents and various other things. So I thought MIT was wonderful, but in some instances, actually not. But anyway, it's licensed through the MIT license. It's very much tied to Microsoft and Azure. So if your organization isn't using Azure, for example, let's say you're based in GCP, you're based in AWS, then that's going to be a problem to run, for example, that Azure REST source that we talked about. And again, as I said, it's tied very much to Microsoft as well. With that, large corporation, you make your own mind up about what you want to do about that. There's no, or I've put limited there, but I actually couldn't find any internal support. When I'm talking about internal support, I'm talking about taking a package from the community, bringing all those resources into that package and being able to take that anywhere as a transportable package, let's say to a machine that's offline, and actually install it from there, or give it to somebody to install. There's none of that internal part of it because it's just YAML files. There's nothing holding those files together, certainly at the moment anyway. There's limited repository manager options that we looked at, so that might be a big deal for your organization. A lot of organizations run things like Artifactory, let's say, that does a whole host of different repository types. Vagrant, Docker, NPM, Maven, all that other stuff. And, if you're then coming in and using a tool that requires its own repository, that might be a problem for you. It might be fine, but it might be a problem. So it's worth pointing out there as well. I couldn't find any source authentication. It could be whole questions to the end. Yeah, fine. There couldn't find any source authentication at all. So I'm put that in italics because maybe I've been missing it. But if you've got an authenticated source, I couldn't find any way to add any of the authentication in there. There's something about web headers. Perhaps you could do something like that, but I couldn't find anything direct. The tool is free though, but as we know in IT, nothing is actually free. You're going to have to train your team, you're going to have to build infrastructure and pay for it, etc., etc. But the tool itself is free. But there's no business support. If you need an organizational support, you're going to have to queue up with everybody else. From a Chocolatey side of things, deployment is fairly, I put there, deployment is easy because we've got the single command that you can run, or you can use that MSI, and it's the same across all the operating systems. It's an Apache v2 license as opposed to MIT, which is kind of for the patents thing. Again, not a lawyer, we can go and look that up, but that might be better for you, or MIT might be better for you. Again, it's just whatever your organization is happy with. It's flexible and decentralized in the sense it's not tied to a particular company or a particular cloud or a particular technology. It integrates with everything. It's got internal package support, which I talked about. You bring all your resources together in a package. We've got that NuGet v2 and v3 repository managers as well, so it gives you that wide support. Talked about Artifactory or whatever else you've got installed. But if you're already running repository managers, chances are that it will support NuGet v2 or v3, so you could use that as well. And there are those free and business options. Again, the same, tools free, nothing's free, but you've got business options for Chocolatey. We've got a support team that kind of white glove all of our customers through setting things up. We've got issues talking them through that. And the other thing is I wanted to mention was the last time I looked at the response time for tickets, it was 12 minutes from the first ticket around, which was pretty awesome. I've never worked in an organization that was that quick. So privacy. So telemetry. This is a big problem for me. This is the part where I kind of criticize Winget a little bit. It's actually not Winget, it's more Microsoft. It seems to be a more Microsoft thing. I would suggest that if you collect data by default, you're collecting data without consent. I would much rather your tool opted in, or your users opted in to using telemetry for the tool, rather than having to opt out. That's just me. But to give Winget its due there, while it does collect data by default, you can opt out, and it will also honour your Windows privacy settings. So it'll still collect the information locally, but it doesn't send it anywhere. But there's also a dependent package that collects data with no opt-out. It's called the Microsoft.ui.xaml.2.7 package, and that does collect telemetry. So it says there is no opt-out for it. I don't know how it will work as part of Winget and collects that data. I don't know, you would have to look into it, but the package collects data and there is no opt-out is all I can tell you from that. On the Chocolatey side, it's fairly straightforward. You don't collect telemetry at all. Sometimes we, as a team, we talk about it much to our detriment because we're not aware of how customers are using our tool. But something I wanted to highlight here, and it's in the opposite of the Winget stance, is this was an issue, or a comment, sorry, was raised in an issue in GitHub in the Winget CLI repository. And it's by Rob Reynolds. Give me just a second while I drink. And there's only a couple of bits I want to highlight. I'm not going to read all of that. So the bit I wanted to highlight there was the Chocolatey client-side tools have never and will never collect telemetry or any data. So that's what we've committed to doing. We're not, but if you use Chocolatey, we don't collect any data. It never phones home. None of that. The part where we do collect information is when you use the community repository, and we'll collect the IP address that you're installing a package from, or querying the package, installing a package from it is installed, and some request information, but it's no more than you would get with any web hosting. And we use that for download statistics, so we can say this package has 4 million downloads. The reason we can say that is that information that we have. And it's for identifying abuses of a service. And we get some organizations that will hit the Chocolatey Community repository with millions and millions of requests in a day. And we have to be able to manage that. Otherwise, nobody gets access to the repository. The final thing I wanted to bring up was, and we're going to read this bit verbatim, is this is what Rob has said. When folks are using Chocolatey internally or within an organization, where they never touch the community repository, there is zero collection of telemetry. It's not a right to collect it, and having the data to understand how you use the tool and make it better is not good enough reason. And I really, really wish a lot of organizations had that same commitment, if I'm being really honest. So, summary. Easy installation on both sides. We've got some of the caveats we talked about, but it's fairly easy once you overcome those. The Winget tool is early, it's only 3 years old, but as I mentioned, it's come a long way in those 3 years with that 4,200 packages. Bear in mind, those stats were taken a couple of weeks ago, they would now have increased from there. Don't know what it would be, but it was certainly that way a couple of weeks ago. Chocolatey's mature, we just turned 12 years old in March. A lot of people don't know that, we think we've just come about, but no, we've been around for a very long time now. Both of them have large repositories of packages. Winget, I would say, is quite simple compared to Chocolatey, which can be powerful, but it can also be complex. So that power is a double-edged sword sometimes. I do really like the terminal integration for Winget. I think it looks really good. We support a lot more platforms than Winget does, so I think that's... We've got future support. We're looking at making it work with Spectre, for example, to give that much better looking out-of-the-box look. But the metadata and PowerShell that we use as part of the packages is a blessing and a curse. So we've talked about that flexibility where you can do things after the package is installed, before the package is installed. That's all great, and it's really powerful if you use it. If you just want to install something and not worry about any of that, it can be sometimes a little bit overwhelming, particularly when you're creating packages for the first time. So with that complexity and that power comes that blessing and that curse as well. I did mention that the manifest I feel is limiting for Winget because it's just that YAML file that's installing those installers with the options. Chocolatey's flexible and decentralized, Microsoft's Azure centric. In both cases, I think docs need work. I talked about the community repository documentation for Winget, needing some work there and kind of being a bit more transparent, I think. And the Chocolatey documentation we've said for I don't know how long needs a lot of work. The information's there, but trying to find it sometimes can be difficult. So what to choose? You're probably going to be disappointed because you're probably all expecting me to say Chocolatey. But the truth is, you use whatever works for you. If having out-of-box support in Windows 11 and having that there after 15 minutes, you're up and running with packages is what you're looking for, then use Winget. If you're looking for more packages than what Winget offers, then you would look at Chocolatey. If you're looking for the power from the PowerShell side of things, we'd be able to have that flexibility, you would look at Chocolatey. So it just really depends on what your use case is. And I'm hoping this talk has given you a kind of high-level overview in, what have we done there? 39 minutes that I've run over, of what to actually look for your organization, give you some options there about things that you can judge it on. Those are my details, and that is me finished. You had a question. Okay.
Combined with PowerShell and the deployments from here to provide software. Is there any possibility to use offline with these products?
So the question is that you use SCCM, you use PowerShell application the deployment toolkit. Is there any way that you can use both of them to have offline repositories? Okay. So if you want to just store things on a file share, we'll talk about kind of repositories in a second, but if you want to store things in a file share, as far as my work has gone with Winget, you can store the manifests locally and point to them. So it's not, but in the Chocolatey sense, and I'm going to just give you both so that you can see the difference. Whereas Chocolatey, you can put all the packages on a folder and say Choco install Google Chrome, for example, and point to the folder and it will go and find Google Chrome and install it. Whereas in the Winget case, you would have to say, here's the manifest, the actual manifest itself, rather than the folder containing it. If you want to use offline repositories, then if you use the Azure, if you want it completely offline, then you could potentially investigate the static web source and use Winget for that. As I kind of alluded to, I hadn't dug into it, but it looks like it supports it. So you could have maybe an IIS site locally and look at that. So you need to look at that. I'm not saying it would work, but you need to look at that. And from the offline case for Chocolatey, any of the repository managers I mentioned, or that static NuGet VT sources as well, repository managers, you'd be able to use them for offline. So you'd have that in your organization and just use Chocolatey to point to that. Okay.
But before we mentioned the lack of source application for simplification, do you mean way a package takes towards the repository, or do you mean the way the repository, the package repository to client?
So what you're asking, I mentioned a couple of slides ago that Winget didn't have any source authentication, and you said you were asking. Oh, right. Okay. So you're saying that is the authentication when you're pushing a package to it, and or you're pulling it from it. As far as I can understand, there is no authentication at all for the sources, so they have to be unauthenticated. So pushing to it, you would, in fact, I'm actually not entirely sure how you push packages from Winget to an external source. So I had actually never done that. That's a good point. But I can't see any way that you can say add a source and here's the authentication for that. So here's a username and password, or here's an API key, or here's a token, or something. I couldn't find anything. So I'm not saying that it's not there. I couldn't find it. I thought that was missing. The reason I'm kind of hesitant here is because it would make sense for that to be added. Demetrius at the back would probably be the best person to speak to. So Demetrius is part of the Winget team, as you see there. He's the expert on Winget as opposed to me, but I couldn't find anything. So, okay, and that would maybe be part of the community repository submission, perhaps. Demetrius would be the best person to ask about that. So as I said, I'm not bashing Winget. I couldn't find it. But to answer the Chocolatey side of things, it supports an API key that you can use for authentication. We have just a minute and a bit. Does anybody else, apart from those two, have questions? Yes. Did you say in an organization setting? Uh-huh. The question is, if I use an internal repository with Chocolatey, is there any way to restrict access to that repository based on Active Directory group memberships? That would be down to the repository manager itself. I know that Nexus does, and Artifactory, James would be the best person to answer that. But I think Artifactory definitely does, and I think Nexus would support that, and probably the other ones as well. But bear in mind that Chocolatey is talking to those repositories, so it's not managing. The repository manager manages the repository, so it'll be down to it as to whether you can use the group memberships within that or not to be able to get access to those packages. So that wouldn't be a Chocolatey thing itself. Manfred, we have 20 seconds left. So the question is, because if you see the slides here, looking at Adobe Acrobat Reader, there's dots in the package ID for Adobe Acrobat Reader. The Chocolatey one is Adobe Reader. Is there any way to align those names so that, you know, if you're using both of those package managers, it doesn't get confusing? Is that pretty much, yeah? Demetrius wants to answer that, I hope.
So you can actually get but if you've got more than one source of data, or the other variability on the just make it go so you can go back and get a full qualified. And for example, the 64-bit is a gold reader, the x86-bit is not. So there are some little gaps there, but if the community has already established that pattern, Winget will go in and add the monikers and conform to that. We only allow one moniker per community source. So you can't moniker slot on the community repository. But if you had an enterprise one, you can create it.
And that's just to kind of expand on that just a little bit, and I know we're just over, is that because the community are managing both of these repositories and they're really, I was going to say dictating, that's the wrong word, they're really establishing things as they move forward. You're going to find sometimes these, not the inconsistencies between the package managers, but inconsistencies that later on you think, oh, we could do this. We've got 500 packages that don't match what we've now done, and you have to sort of work around that. So that will be as much of a problem for Winget as it will be for Chocolatey. We're actually over time, so I can't take any more questions. However, this is the end of the day. Come and see us at the booth tomorrow. If you've got any questions about Chocolatey, Demetrius is here. If you look at the back, you'll see him. You can ask him all the questions you need to about Winget. Thanks very much.